You lock eyes with someone across a crowded room. There's no introduction, no warning, just a gravitational pull that feels like fate. A warmth floods your chest. They smile, and something inside you whispers, "There you are, I've been waiting for you." It doesn't make sense, but it doesn't have to. You feel seen, known, understood. And so begins the story you've been trained to believe. The soulmate has arrived. But weeks pass, then months. Then months. The fire burns, yes, but it also sears. You fight, reconcile, fight again. Each conflict cuts deeper than it should. Every apology feels hollow. There's love, but also chaos. There's connection, but also wounds you thought you'd buried long ago, now ripped open and raw. And still you can't leave. You're convinced it means something deeper. Isn't this intensity a sign of true love? What if it's not? What if the person who feels like home is actually your unfinished story? What if that electric spark isn't destiny, but trauma disguised as chemistry? What if, instead of a soulmate, you found a woundmate, someone whose brokenness matches yours in just the right way to keep both of you trapped? Why do we fall for the very people who activate our oldest pain? Why does love so often feel like déjà vu with a hint of danger? And if this isn't love, what is it? Let's go deeper. We speak of love as though it were a clean slate, a story that begins when two people meet. But that's a lie. Love doesn't start with the first kiss. It starts with the first wound. Long before we know how to give or receive love, we learn what it costs. We absorb it through the tone of a parent's voice, the absence of a hug when we needed it most, the silent judgment in moments of vulnerability. These aren't just memories, they're blueprints. Psychologist Gabor Maté calls it the echo of unmet needs. It's not the trauma itself that shapes us, he explains, but how we learn to adapt to its absence. We become caretakers, fixers, pleasers, avoiders, and then we grow up and call it a personality. But these traits aren't who we are. They're who we had to become in order to survive. Enter Carl Jung, whose concept of the shadow reveals even more. Jung believed that we carry within us the disowned, repressed parts of ourselves, the pain we can't name, the rage we're taught to deny, the desire we've been told is shameful. And here's the trap. When we refuse to face those shadows, we unconsciously project them onto others. We don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with our own pain, mirrored back to us. This is the psychology of the woundmate. You're not drawn to someone simply because they complete you. You're drawn to them because they activate your earliest emotional blueprint. They feel familiar, not in a comforting way, but in a recognizable way. Their avoidance resembles your father's distance. Their volatility mirrors your mother's unpredictability. Their silence feels like that cold bedroom where you cried yourself to sleep as a child. And your nervous system doesn't panic. It remembers. This must be love, it tells you. You've been here before. Arthur Schopenhauer once described love as a delusion of the species. Not a romantic fantasy, but an unconscious drive rooted in suffering. We're not rational in love. We're compelled. We seek in others what we most fear in ourselves, and we call this destiny. The philosophical roots run deeper still. Jean-Paul Sartre warned of the bad faith we carry when we let others define our meaning. When you fall into a woundmate dynamic, you are no longer choosing consciously. You are surrendering your freedom to the past, living a life authored by ghosts. Every argument, every reconciliation, every high and low becomes a reenactment of unresolved history. It feels intense, it feels important, but it's a performance, a familiar play with recycled lines. Society, of course, feeds the illusion. From childhood, we're taught that love is a lightning strike, sudden, passionate, uncontrollable. Fairy tales tell us that the right person will save us. Hollywood romances insist that intensity equals intimacy. No one teaches us that sometimes the person you can't stop thinking about is the one your inner child is trying to fix. And so we walk straight into the fire, mistaking the burn for warmth. We don't ask if this person respects us. We ask, why do they feel like home? But what if home was chaotic? What if home was neglect? What if home was conditional love served with a side of fear? Then the pull we feel isn't proof of love, it's proof of pattern. This is the hidden architecture of your attraction. And the tragedy is, the more it hurts, the more convinced you are that it means something real. You begin to think, this must be fate. It's too intense to be anything else. But what if it's not fate? What if it's just familiar pain, calling you back into the same locked room, hoping you'll finally notice the door? The question is, what happens when you do? You live your life believing you're choosing, that every relationship, every heartbreak, every reunion is the result of free will. But what if you're not choosing at all? What if you're being pulled, not by love, not by destiny, but by the echoes of a wound you never fully saw, let alone healed? Woundmates don't walk into your life with red flags. They walk in with familiarity. Their voice calms your chaos not because they're safe, but because their rhythm matches the tremble of your childhood. You say, they get me, but what they get, what they activate, is the very pattern that broke you in the first place. And slowly, without knowing it, you begin to orbit around that pain. Neurologically, the brain loves the familiar, even if it's harmful. When your nervous system is conditioned in trauma, it learns to associate chaos with connection. So when you enter a relationship that mirrors the emotional volatility of your upbringing, your body doesn't scream danger, it whispers comfort. It confuses arousal with safety, intensity with love, unpredictability with passion. The result? You stay too long. You forgive too easily. You mistake anxiety for butterflies. You confuse the emotional roller coaster for romance. And every time they hurt you, you think, maybe if I love them better, they'll finally choose me. That's not love. That's repetition compulsion. Freud coined the term to describe the unconscious drive to reenact unresolved trauma in new scenarios. You're not falling in love. You're falling into the same wound, over and over, hoping it ends differently this time. But it never does, because you're not dealing with the present. You're dancing with the past, dressed in modern clothes. This cycle does more than break your heart. It breaks your identity. You start to believe that you are the problem, that you're too much or not enough, that you're hard to love, that love always hurts. And the more you believe this, the more you settle. You adapt to the emotional starvation. You rationalize their avoidance, their neglect, their cruelty, and society applauds you for it. It calls it working on the relationship. It says love is hard. It romanticizes struggle and glorifies endurance. It tells you that great love must come with great suffering, as if suffering is a rite of passage, not a red flag. Meanwhile, your sense of self erodes. You silence your intuition. You override your boundaries. You become a caretaker for someone else's chaos while neglecting your own healing. And you tell yourself this is what love is supposed to be: selfless, patient, enduring. You call it commitment, but in truth, it's self-abandonment dressed in devotion. The deeper cost is spiritual. You stop trusting your own perception. You lose your inner compass. The more you justify their behavior, the more you gaslight yourself. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm just sensitive. Maybe this is what love takes. And in that fog, you forget who you are. This is how generational trauma survives. Not in the obvious ways, but in whispered compromises, in almosts and maybes, in the space between I love you and why does this hurt so much? You pass it on without meaning to your children, to your friendships, to your self-talk. You normalize what should be alarming. You settle where you should rise, and you build a life around an old injury, mistaking the pain for permanence. But here's the cruelest twist. The longer you stay, the harder it is to leave. Not because you love them more, but because leaving would mean confronting the truth. That this wasn't a soulmate story after all. That this was a mirror, a trap, a wound so cleverly disguised as love, you mistook it for salvation, and so you stay. Until one day, maybe, you wake up and ask the unthinkable. What if this pain isn't proof of love? What if it's proof that I've never met myself? That question is the beginning of everything. It starts in silence, not with a breakup, not with a screaming match, but with the quiet realization that your suffering is self-authored now, that no one else is holding the pen. You were waiting for them to change, to apologize, to see you, to love you right, but they won't. And the part of you that believed they ever would, that's the first part that must die. Rebellion in this case is not rage, it is clarity. The moment you recognize that love, if it is real, must first be rooted in safety, not chaos. That intensity is not intimacy. That chemistry is not compatibility. That healing is not about fixing others. It's about finally refusing to betray yourself. And the rebellion begins here. You stop chasing the familiar. This is harder than it sounds, because the familiar feels like oxygen. It has shaped you for so long that its absence will feel like withdrawal. When you reject the dynamic of the woundmate, your body will scream. Your nervous system will accuse you of abandonment. Your mind will replay the best parts. Nostalgia will masquerade as reason. It will whisper, "You're being too harsh. Maybe you're the one who's broken. Maybe you'll never find love like that again." But you will. Because now you're no longer looking for someone to finish your story. You're rewriting the story yourself. Gabor Maté said, "The attempt to escape pain creates more pain. What you must do is not escape, but turn toward it. Hold your trauma like a child and say, 'I see you.' I will not throw you into the arms of another just to feel wanted again." Carl Jung would call this shadow integration, the process of facing the darkness within you, not to destroy it, but to understand it. You look into the mirror and name the pattern, not as fate, but as a choice that ends here. You stop projecting your wounds onto others. You stop confusing suffering with proof of love. You reclaim the parts of you that were once too ashamed to stand in the light. This is not the love story you were promised, but it is the love story that will save you. And once you reclaim your inner world, your outer choices begin to shift. You will start to feel the difference between connection and compulsion. You'll notice that people who once thrilled you now make your stomach churn. The chaos that once felt electric now feels corrosive. The silence of a peaceful love, once mistaken for boredom, now feels like coming home. And as you rise, the world around you resists. Because the moment you stop performing your trauma, people get uncomfortable. The ones who benefited from your self-abandonment will call you selfish. The culture that profits from your emptiness will tell you you're lonely. Even your mind will tempt you to return to the burn, because at least there you felt something. But don't go back. Your life was never meant to be a loop of emotional déjà vu. You were not born to repeat patterns, you were born to transform them. Break the mirror, let the illusion die. You don't need someone to finish your sentence, you need space to find your voice. You don't need a soulmate to complete you. You need solitude to meet yourself. This is the rebellion, not a war against love, but against every lie you believed about it. Because only once you walk through that fire do you understand the most radical truth. You were never broken, you were just buried. Here is the truth that breaks everything and then sets you free. You were never searching for a soulmate. You were searching for yourself. Every woundmate you ever loved was a mirror, reflecting back the parts of you you had forgotten, rejected, disowned. The longing you felt for them was never about them. It was the ache of your own lost self crying out from the depths of your unconscious, begging to be seen. This is what Gabor Maté meant when he said that trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside you as a result of what happened. And what happens inside you is a kind of self-fracturing. You split into roles, into masks, into survival strategies. And those broken pieces go searching, not for healing, but for familiarity. They look for someone to reenact the original script. Because even if it hurts, at least it makes sense. But sense is not truth. And love built on trauma will never set you free. Here's what no one tells you. The purpose of these painful relationships is not punishment, it's revelation. The person who broke you open was the teacher you never knew you called for. Not because they were wise, but because they were a perfect match for the lessons you were too afraid to face. They mirrored your abandonment so you would stop abandoning yourself. They triggered your rage so you would finally stop silencing your own voice. They withdrew their love so you would be forced to find it inside. And once you see it, truly see it, something shifts, not all at once, not cleanly, but enough. Enough to recognize that every person who wounded you was showing you your unfinished business, not your forever home. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But now, for the first time, fate is unraveling. The pattern is breaking because you're no longer looking for someone to fix. You're no longer trying to prove your worth through endurance. You're no longer attracted to what breaks you. You've turned inward, and you're meeting someone new, yourself. And in that meeting, you realize something profound. You were never hard to love. You just kept offering your heart to people who didn't know how to hold it. You weren't broken. You were repeating. You weren't too sensitive. You were too intuitive to ignore what others learned to numb. And the love you longed for, it wasn't somewhere out there. It wasn't hiding in another person's arms or eyes. It was waiting within you to be remembered, reclaimed, restored. This doesn't mean you'll never love again. It means the next time you love, you'll do it with eyes open, with a nervous system that recognizes peace, with boundaries that honor your worth, with a heart that no longer chases suffering disguised as passion. You'll stop asking, "Will they love me?" and start asking, "Does this feel like home? Not the home I came from, but the one I've built within." This is not the soulmate fantasy you were sold, but it is the soul deep transformation you were born for. When you stop looking for someone to save you, you realize you were never lost, just disconnected from your own power. You walked into the fire thinking it was warmth. You stayed because the pain was familiar. You called it love because that's what the world taught you to call it. But now you know, it was never about them. It was always about the parts of you crying out to be reclaimed. There is no shame in having chosen a woundmate. There is only power in recognizing it, and even greater power in walking away. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving you. And loving yourself is not a soft thing. It is not bubble baths or mantras whispered into the mirror. It is the courage to stop answering calls from your past that come disguised as destiny. It is building a home inside your own soul so no one else becomes your shelter or your storm. You may still crave the fire, but you will no longer confuse it with light. You may still feel the pull, but now you will pause and ask, not do they love me, but does this feel like truth? Because true love does not set you on fire. It holds your hand as you walk through your own flames. And when you emerge, burnt, blistered, reborn, you'll know you didn't lose a soulmate. You found yourself.